you very much for that introduction. So I'll try to give you a brief course on how to fix a telescope here. But no, my pleasure to be here. I'll give you a little bit of a little background on my path to becoming an astronaut, some of the things I went through, some of the things I learned, some of the things I got to do, and maybe what's coming next as well, my opinions on that. But mainly I want to tell you how cool it is to fly in space. That's what I'll try to convey to you this morning. So I'll start with this. This is not me, by the way. Of course, this is from the first moon landing. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. I was 6 years old. I'm old enough to remember this. And it changed my life. It made me want to grow up, not only to be an astronaut, but I wanted to grow up to be just like Neil Armstrong. And this is my proof of that. This is me dressed up like Neil Armstrong in the backyard in Franklin Square, Long Island, just outside of Queens, New York City. The reason it's a gray flight suit that I'm wearing is because it's a converted elephant costume from the first grade play. And I'm holding my astronaut Snoopy. And we had these backyard adventures. You know, Snoopy was my co-pilot, and we were on the moon. And this was glorious time. By the time I was about 8 years old, I realized I could never grow up to be like Neil Armstrong. So when I discovered I was afraid of heights and scared of most things, actually, as a little kid, and didn't think I could ever grow up to be a fearless test pilot like my hero. When I was a senior in college studying engineering, I went to the movies and saw this movie, The Right Stuff, based on the book by Tom Wolfe about the original 7 astronauts and the test pilots that came before them. And it rekindled my interest. And I started looking into what the space program was like then. Now it's the mid-1980s. And I think that's something to remember. I was speaking to some young people yesterday about becoming an astronaut. And you never know what's going to happen, because things are always changing. And the space program has changed so much over the last 60 years since I was aware of what was happening. At this point now, when I started looking into it in the mid-1980s, it was not just military test pilots. That was still a big part of it. But it was also scientists and engineers. With the Space Shuttle program, the first people of color were selected. The first women were selected to be astronauts. And although I still never had any delusion that I would ever become an astronaut, I thought that was still kind of far-fetched. I thought, well, maybe I could at least try, and if I can't become an astronaut, maybe I could help others go to space. So that was my goal. After college, I worked for a couple years at IBM. Went to grad school at MIT to try to pursue this career. After I was there a couple years, NASA made an announcement they were looking for astronauts. I filled out an application. 9 months later, I got a letter that said no. They told me no. A couple years later, they're looking for astronauts again. I sent in another application. I got back another letter. This one was a little different. They changed the date. Other than that, it was the same letter. I got rejected a second time. Got out of grad school, went to work at the Johnson Space Center for McDonnell Douglas. NASA's looking for astronauts again. Application number 3 goes in. This time I don't get a letter, I got a phone call to come in for an interview. The interview process back then was a whole week of stuff. Medical exams, social events, selection board interview. They get to know you very well. They got to know me very well, and with that information, they rejected me. So I was 0 for 3. I was also medically disqualified. Now, these are things that changed. Back then, you didn't have to see perfectly, but you had to see pretty well without glasses or contacts. They didn't accept LASIK. Now they do accept LASIK. They accept other procedures. If you're interested, if you don't see very well, don't cross it off the list of occupations any longer. But back then, you had to see pretty well, and I failed the eye exam. I thought there had to be a way around this, so I wanted to at least be able to apply again, because once you're disqualified, they won't look at your application any longer. So I had to get that overturned before they could consider me. I found out about something called vision training, made an appointment with an optometrist in Houston who did this vision training. She took one look at me and she said, I don't think it's going to work. And I said, why not? I haven't even hooked up to the machine yet. She goes, well, it only works with kids. She's never had, their eyes are still forming and their brain's developing. And she said, I never had a patient that was older than 10 years old. I said, Dr. Hopping, I could be so immature, you won't know the difference. And I begged her, I was desperate. So she agreed to help me, and I was able to pick up a couple lines on the eye chart just so I could send in another application. And I did that a couple years later. The next time NASA was looking for people, got another interview, got through the eye exam, and was picked to be in the astronaut class in 1996. Oh, thank you. You're very kind. All right, so I don't look like this anymore. This is 1996. About the second row from the top, the third guy from the left, that's me. So one of the things that was different about this astronaut class, we were very international. So now I took, back when I was a little boy, it was the United States going to the moon with test pilots. And now we had come to where it was a very international program. We've heard a lot about the International Space Station. This was the beginning of it. So it was mentioned earlier, the first element launch was in 98, 2 years after this photo was taken, and then the first people who inhabited the space station is continuously inhabited since 2000. So we were getting ready to do that. We had 8 different countries represented in my astronaut class, and we also were going to be working, of course, with the Russians in a partnership. So things were changing. Now we were going to be working internationally, control centers around the planet, and we were beginning to get all that ready to go. When I got sent to space, as Richard said, I was sent to the Hubble Space Telescope. Magnificent instrument in the sky, is still working, still producing great science along with the James Webb Telescope. It's discovered things like when it first launched, it discovered black holes and planets in other solar systems, but it also discovered things they didn't even know to look for, like dark matter, dark energy, which led to the awarding of a Nobel Prize. It was designed to be serviced by astronauts. So Hubble was designed to be taken apart. Everything could be taken off of it using power tools and other tools to undo connectors and latches. You could remove just about anything, whether it was a science instrument, a solar panel, a gyroscope, whatever it might be. You could take this thing apart and put new stuff in. There were 5 missions to service Hubble. I was on the final 2 of those missions. My job primarily was to be a spacewalker or a repair person on the telescope. That's me on the left. My buddy Mike Good, Air Force Colonel, is on the robot arm. Mike Good, his last name was Good, so we called him Bueno. That was his nickname. Very creative. So Bueno's on the robot arm. I'm floating around using my hands. We're about to open up the telescope and do a gyroscope change-out practice run. That's a full-scale mock-up of the telescope in front of us, a full-scale mock-up of the space shuttle below us. And if you look to the right, there's a little bit of structure sticking out. That's a full-scale mock-up of the International Space Station. This is a really big pool. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's 100 feet wide, 200 feet long, and 40 feet deep. But we called it the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. It truly was a laboratory because every day we went there, we tried to figure out a way to do things better. Even if we could save 1 minute of spacewalking time, that was significant. So if we could think of a new tool to use or a new technique or a different body positioning or a new communication method or whatever it might be, if we could save a little bit of time, do things more efficiently, that meant we can do more things to help the telescope. So everyone had a voice, everyone contributed, and it was a great way to problem solve. That's me on my very first spacewalk. It's the first thing you do on your spacewalk is you get your picture taken. So that's what I did. You can see the Earth reflected in my visor. It's just glorious. Looking down at the planet, here's a shot of the Earth. It's just beautiful. I felt like I was looking into heaven. I can't imagine any place being more beautiful anywhere in the universe compared to our planet. I do think there's life out there somewhere, but we're very lucky to be here. And if we do find life, I wonder if their planet will be as beautiful as ours. I don't know if it will. Ours is just a beautiful place to live. If you look at the very top of that image there, you can see a very thin blue line. That's the extent of our atmosphere. So that's the other thing that struck me, is that I could view this beautiful planet that we live on, our home, but I was wearing life support, right? I was wearing a spacesuit, and I couldn't survive much, really just a couple minutes without it. So I was dependent on life support because I was above the atmosphere, and that thinness of it you see. And I know a lot of people here, the whole club is trying to help the planet heal itself and stay healthy, and we're all about keeping the environment and keeping the environment well and sustainability and so on. But when you see it from space, you really get the impression, wow, we got to be careful here. You look the other direction, you see this beautiful planet with this very thin atmosphere. You look the other direction, it's kind of cool. You see stars and stuff, what's out there. But we've checked out the neighborhood. We got nowhere to go. We've got to make this planet work. So it's a beautiful place, but it's also very fragile. And this happens to be a shot of the Middle East, by the way, if you look closely there. And a lot of turmoil, war, things going on there, but you see it from space, and it looks beautiful. So, okay, that's my crew for my second flight into space. I'm going to play you a short clip of my second launch into space. This is back on Space Shuttle Atlantis in May of 2009.
All right, let's go!
Go for launch, GNC. Go. Payloads. Go. Guidance. Go. Fido. Go. Prop. Go. GNC. Go. Max. Go. Eagle. Go. Ecom. Go.
7, 6, 4, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis. Final visit to
ranging? I do. Alright, I see him in the bucket. Mid 71.
Atlantis on its way, all 3 engines now throttling down as the area begins, as the vehicle passes through the area of maximum dynamic pressure.
Atlantis, Houston, no action on the MPS H2 altitude.
Houston, we copy, no action. Back at 104, Scooter.
Three, 103.
Auto. Okay, that all looks good.
Okay. This is a photo of what you just saw at the beginning. At the beginning of the video, the main engine started up first. Those 3 main engines are liquid fueled, which means you could shut them down. If you saw something that you didn't like, you could shut it down. That happened twice in the history of the shuttle program. But you only have 6 seconds to make up your mind. Because after those 6 seconds, the solid rocket boosters they're like giant sticks of dynamite. And once you light them, you can't turn them off. And you are on your way. It might not be where you want to be going, but you're heading in that direction. And they run really rough, run really rough. So right here in this picture, so you get shook up a lot. And at the end of that, at the end of 2.5 minutes, they then leave the vehicle, and that's what you saw at the end of that video. But right here, we have not yet cleared the tower, and we're already going 100 miles an hour, and we accelerate from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in just 8.5 minutes. This is for my second flight. This is my very last spacewalk. At the speed I mentioned, we'd go around the planet every 90 minutes, so about half that time approximately is in bright sunlight, and the other half is in darkness. And we're going on the planet now, we're going from darkness into daylight. That's what's going on Earth. So we get 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets in a 24-hour period when we're up there. If you look into the telescope, you see 2 feet sticking out. Those are my feet. Those are my boots. And this was something we never tried before. This was the last mission to Hubble. We wanted to do everything we could to keep the telescope going for as long as possible. As I said, most things on the telescope, in fact, everything on the telescope you could remove and put something new in. But there was one instrument, the Space Telescope Imaging Spectrograph, STIS, which is about the size of a refrigerator, that was no longer working. It had an electrical short, took out the power supply. They couldn't turn the machine on anymore, the instrument on. It was a wonderful machine, could analyze the atmospheres of far-off planets, amongst other things, but they couldn't turn the thing on anymore. And we did not have a replacement for it. So we started kicking around the idea, could we take this thing apart? Now, this thing was never intended to be taken apart. The power supply was like a computer board with a 120-pin connector at the back, held in place with launch lock bolts, which meant they're there to withstand launch. Very hard to overcome those bolts to get this thing out of there. It had an access panel with 111 tiny screws to hold it in place, all of which had a washer and glue on the staking on the thread so it wouldn't come out. So we had all these steps to do here. Could we do this? We realized we thought we could. It was going to be difficult. We came up with over 100 new tools at great taxpayer expense, might I add, to do this. But we really wanted to get this job done, and it fell on my day, so I trained to do it for a couple of years. Every day I was thinking about it, trying to see what we could do better, thinking about what could go wrong. The easiest thing I was going to do that day was remove a handrail, which was blocking access to a couple of those tiny screws. And it had 2 screws at the top, 2 screws at the bottom. It would take about 30 seconds. This was so easy because they were big screws that we didn't even have a backup for it, because even I couldn't mess this one up. That was the thinking. But let me show you what happened. This is from my helmet camera, so that bar has to get out of the way. So the one on the lower right, so I was able to get 3 out of the 4 screws out, but the one on the lower right, I strip it, and we can't get it out. And here's NASA's high-tech solution. Think about this. Watch it very closely.
There we go.
Very high-tech.
So, disposal bag, please.
Yeah, they just told me to rip it off. So that was a pretty simple solution, but again, we had no solution to this, and I realized we didn't have any planned solution to this. But I realized when I had stripped that screw, I realized that screw's never coming out. The handle's not coming off. 111 screws aren't coming out. We're not going to replace the power supply. We won't bring the instrument back to life. We'll never find out if there's life in the universe, and everyone's going to blame me. And that was not far from the truth. I actually leaned out of the telescope before I said anything, and I looked down at the planet, and we were over the Pacific Ocean, And I was like, well, I can't even get to a hardware store if I tried. You know, we're really far away here. But I fessed up, of course, and what happened was they put the machinery into motion. One engineer in the back room thought to himself, what would I do if I was in my garage? I would just use brute force and yank that off. And he called to the Goddard Space Flight Center. They took an instrument out of a clean room, set it up in the same configuration, pulled on the top of that hand drill with a fish scale, and it busted that one bolt at 60 pounds force. And then he called it into this team, Dan Burbank, a Capcom, my good friend and astronaut classmate on the left, and our flight director, Tony Sakachi. And they had me tape the bottom of the hand drill very carefully. Bueno and I were doing that, make sure, we wanted to contain debris. Once you bust metal, we couldn't have anything going to the telescope or come back and hit us and damage our spacesuit. So that's what we did. But our team came through. You know, reach out to mission control when you need help is the lesson there. I was a very sad astronaut when this happened. I had to learn how to deal with mistakes as an astronaut. There were two things that when I did that, I was a nightmare when I did this. I could not believe that I made this mistake. And one of the things I kept thinking was the 30-second rule. And that's something I learned in my training. Give yourself 30 seconds of regret. Beat yourself up, call yourself names, do whatever you need to do to just don't vocalize any of this. Keep it internally. But just, you know, beat yourself up for 30 seconds and then you have to leave it in the past. And that's how I was able to leave my mistakes in the past. The other thing that I remembered that I kept thinking, you know, I didn't think we were going to come up with a solution, but I knew I had to keep going, to keep trying. And I remembered that what I had learned was no matter how bad a situation is, no matter how bad you've messed up, you need to remember you can make it worse. Right? So this, you know, this idea is going to get better. No. Let's not break anything else. Let's not cause any other trouble. And so 30 seconds of regret, don't make it worse. And then I was a happy astronaut. This is me sending the first tweet from space. Yeah, very historic moment. There you go. Yes. Take that, Neil Armstrong. Okay. This is me with my Snoopy, the same one I had as a little kid. I brought him with me for real. All right, third for Snoopy. Okay, we're winding down now. This is our landing, one of the last landings of the shuttle program. We don't fly, this is more like a history lesson. We don't fly space shuttles anymore, right? They're all in museums throughout the United States. So it was a little bittersweet. We knew we were ending, but looking forward to what might come next. And what came next at the time, now going back, 15 years ago, we were talking about these things, we knew the shuttle program had to retire. It had, by the time it ran its course, it was 30 years, 135 flights, 2 major accidents, and after that second accident, we knew it was going to wind down. We were going to finish the space station and one more flight to Hubble, and we were able to do that, and then it was going to be retired. But NASA made another big change. And the big change then was to start working with private companies as a partnership to send people to space. And so what you see on the left is the shuttle, and on the right is the SpaceX vehicle going to space, which is how we get one of the ways we get astronauts to space from the United States now. We also now have another option. The Boeing Starliner went to space a few weeks ago. I haven't gotten an update of what's going on there, but at least they launched and got to the space station. So we'll see what how they feel about the vehicle maybe in a couple more weeks of how it all went. But it's commercial. It's very commercialized, and I think it was a really smart move on NASA's part. There's only so much you can do with government dollars, with taxpayers' dollars. So trying to leverage the ingenuity and the creativity and the speed of private enterprise was something NASA had wanted to do for decades, and finally we're starting to see some of the results. So as far as what's coming down the pike, there's hopefully going back to the moon, on to Mars, but I think just as the space program has changed over my lifetime, it will continue to change and become more and more a commercial enterprise, but governments also are participating, and I think in that way we're drawing not just from the talent pool of all people being included, being able to participate in the space program, not just a select few, not just a few countries, but the entire planet, and not only governments, but also private enterprise, and working together. I do think we will get back to the moon and on to Mars. That's what NASA's hoping to do, of course, with the SLS, but I think it's not just going to be, when we get to landings and so on, it's not just going to be NASA. I think it's going to be also private enterprise going with them. This is my last slide. This is what I call the big picture. It's a Hubble image. It's a star field in Omega Centauri. Each one of these dots you see is a star. There's 100,000 of them in this one frame. part of a larger star field with over 10 million stars in it. And I consider this to be the big picture. I try to keep the big picture in mind. I love my job as an astronaut, and I know all of you, the passion that I heard about so many different things these last couple of days that you're doing, that there's a lot of passion and dedication in this room, but I also know it's not easy. There's a lot of work that goes into it, funding issues, hardships, uncomfortable situations, hard work, and it's not always pleasant. And for me, even as an astronaut, there was a lot of times where I wondered, is this worth it? You know, it's a bit dangerous. It was tough on the family. I missed a lot of events and a lot of things by being other places other than at home. And but I always felt that whatever that sacrifice was, it was worth it, because the big picture of what we were doing I thought was very important. And I know each of you have that in your mind of what's important. And so when times get tough, please keep that big picture in place. Thank you very much for having me.